Daemon and Aemond Targaryen are two of the most dangerous men in the history of Westeros, and the similarities between them go way beyond their nearly identical names. These two psychopaths are mirror images of each other, uncle and nephew locked in a death spiral that will eventually destroy their entire family. But what most fans don't realize is that their parallels are so precise, so perfectly crafted, that it's almost like they're the same person born in different generations. Today, I'm breaking down the 8 most shocking parallels between Daemon and Aemond that prove they're two sides of the same bloody coin. And trust me, when you learn about parallel number 6, you'll never look at either character the same way again. Before we dive into these parallels, we need to understand something crucial about House of the Dragon. This isn't just a story about a succession crisis. It's about how history repeats itself, how the same patterns of violence and ambition play out generation after generation in this twisted family. Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, brother to King Viserys, and Aemond Targaryen, the one-eyed prince, son of King Viserys, are perhaps the most perfect example of this cyclical nature. Born decades apart, these two men follow eerily similar paths that ultimately lead them to a legendary confrontation above the God's Eye. I've analyzed Fire and Blood and all 2 seasons of House of the Dragon to identify the most striking parallels between these two characters. These aren't just surface-level similarities, they're deep structural echoes that reveal how the show's writers, and George R.R. Martin himself, crafted these characters as dark reflections of each other. So let's dive into the 8 most crucial parallels between Daemon and Aemond that explain why these two are destined to destroy each other, and take the Targaryen dynasty down with them. Second sons, living in the shadow of the throne. The first and most fundamental parallel between Daemon and Aemond is their position within the royal family. Both men are second sons who live in the shadow of someone they believe is less worthy of power. Daemon is the younger brother of King Viserys, born second and therefore not the direct heir to the throne. Throughout his life, he's had to watch his more gentle, compromising brother wear the crown he believes he deserves. In Season 1, we see his frustration when Viserys names Rhaenyra heir instead of him, driving him to steal a dragon egg and establish himself on Dragonstone. Similarly, Aemond is the second son of Viserys and Alicent, born after Aegon. He grows up watching his dissolute, irresponsible older brother being groomed for a throne that Aemond clearly believes he would be better suited for. In Season 2, we see how Aemond effectively takes control while Aegon is recovering from his wounds, showing his desire to rule. This second son syndrome shapes both men profoundly. They develop a chip on their shoulder, a need to prove themselves more worthy than those who stand before them in the line of succession. This drives them to take risks, to be more brutal, more decisive, and ultimately more dangerous than their older male relatives. What makes this parallel particularly interesting is how differently they handle this similar position. Daemon eventually accepts Rhaenyra as heir and marries her, hitching his ambition to hers. Aemond, on the other hand, grows increasingly resentful of Aegon, setting up a potential conflict within the Green faction that mirrors the original succession crisis itself. Both men are ultimately defined by their relationship to power, not having it directly but being close enough to taste it, to believe they deserve it more than those who have it. This creates in both of them a dangerous combination of entitlement and resentment that fuels their worst actions. Dragon riders of the largest dragons, Vhagar and Caraxes. The second major parallel between Daemon and Aemond is their status as riders of the most fearsome dragons in their respective factions. Daemon rides Caraxes, the Blood Worm, while Aemond claims Vhagar, the oldest and largest living dragon in the world. This isn't just about having dragons, it's about having the most dangerous dragons. Caraxes is described as particularly vicious and battle-hardened, having been previously ridden by Prince Aemon, and then by Daemon in numerous battles. Vhagar is a living weapon of mass destruction, a veteran of Aegon's conquest who has burned entire armies. Both men use their dragons as extensions of their own power and personality. Daemon uses Caraxes to establish himself as a force to be reckoned with, taking Dragonstone, winning the war for the Stepstones, and later fighting for Rhaenyra. Aemond uses Vhagar to terrorize the Riverlands, burning castles and villages in a campaign of fear that earns him comparison to Maegor the Cruel. What's particularly striking is how both men claim their dragons. Daemon inherited Caraxes as part of his position as a Prince of the Blood, but he forms a special bond with the beast, matching its ferocity with his own. Aemond claims Vhagar in a much more controversial way, taking the dragon after Lena Velarion's funeral, effectively stealing the most powerful weapon in the world from House Velaryon. This parallel establishes both men as the primary military threats of their respective factions. They aren't just princes with claims or ambitions, they're living weapons, men who can unleash fire from the sky at will. This makes them both respected and feared, even by their own allies. The brutal truth is that both men understand something fundamental about Targaryen power. It doesn't come from wearing a crown, it comes from riding a dragon. And by claiming the most dangerous dragons available, they establish themselves as the true powers behind their respective factions, regardless of who sits on the Iron Throne. Physical transformations, scars, and symbols. The third parallel between Daemon and Aemond is how their bodies become marked and transformed, turning them into physical manifestations of their inner darkness. Daemon's transformation is more subtle but still significant. Over the course of the series, he ages and hardens, his once handsome face becoming more severe. His silver gold hair grows longer, and he increasingly wears black armor adorned with red details, literally clothing himself in the fire and blood of House Targaryen. By Season 2, he has become physically as well as metaphorically darker. Aemond's transformation is much more dramatic and symbolic. After losing his eye in a childhood fight with his nephews, he wears a sapphire in the empty socket, turning a wound into a statement. He grows his hair long to partially cover the scar, but rather than hiding his injury, he makes it his defining feature. The sapphire eye glows eerily in certain lights, giving him an almost supernatural appearance. What makes these transformations so powerful is how they externalize each man's internal journey. Daemon's darkening appearance reflects his growing bitterness and ruthlessness. Aemond's sapphire eye represents how he has replaced a natural human vulnerability with something hard, cold, and artificial, much like his personality. Both men lean into these transformations, using their appearance to intimidate others. Daemon's black armor and dark demeanor make him a figure of fear. Aemond's sapphire eye and tall, lean physique make him seem almost inhuman, more like a living weapon than a prince. The most disturbing aspect of this parallel is that both men seem to welcome these changes. They don't hide their scars or soften their appearance. They accentuate them, understanding instinctively that in the Game of Thrones, being feared is often more useful than being loved. Sexual deviancy and power plays. The fourth parallel between Daemon and Aemond is their deeply twisted relationship with sex, which both men use as a tool for power rather than for genuine connection. Daemon's sexual deviancy is established early in the series. He keeps a pleasure house, takes his underage niece Rhaenyra to a brothel, and has sex with her years later shortly after his wife's funeral. He uses sex to manipulate, to establish dominance, and to transgress boundaries. His relationship with Mysaria begins as a purely sexual one before evolving into a political alliance. Aemond, while initially portrayed as less overtly sexual than his brother Aegon, shows similar tendencies in Season 2. His encounter with Alice Rivers has distinct power dynamics at play, and there are hints that he, like Daemon, sees sex as another arena for control rather than pleasure or connection. What makes this parallel particularly disturbing is how both men specifically use sex to undermine their rivals. Daemon sleeps with Rhaenyra partly to damage her reputation and challenge Viserys' authority. There are strong hints in the book that Aemond sleeps with Aegon's wife Helaena, the ultimate power move against his brother. Both men understand instinctively that in the Game of Thrones, bedchambers are as much a battlefield as any other. They use sexual conquest as a way to assert dominance, to take what belongs to others, and to transgress the boundaries that constrain ordinary men. The brutal truth is that neither Daemon nor Aemond seems capable of genuine intimacy. Even their seemingly more authentic relationships, Daemon with Rhaenyra, Aemond with Alice Rivers, are tainted by power dynamics and manipulation. They are men who can conquer bodies but never connect with souls. Kingmakers without crowns, the power behind the throne. The fifth parallel between Daemon and Aemond is their role as kingmakers, men who don't wear the crown themselves but effectively control those who do. Daemon positions himself as Rhaenyra's most important supporter, her consort and battle commander. While she technically outranks him as the claimed queen, it's Daemon who makes many of the crucial military decisions. In Season 2, we see him taking initiative without her approval, executing prisoners and sending messages to potential allies. Similarly, Aemond becomes the de facto leader of the Greens, while Aegon is recovering from his wounds. He sits on the Iron Throne, commands armies, and makes decisions that shape the course of the war. While he doesn't claim the title of king, he exercises royal power in all but name. What makes this parallel particularly interesting is that both men seem simultaneously to crave the throne and to reject it. They want power, but understand that sometimes power is more effectively wielded from the shadows. They can take risks and make brutal decisions, while someone else bears the official responsibility. Both men also use similar tactics to maintain their influence. They cultivate personal loyalty from key supporters, demonstrate their military value through victories, and aren't afraid to act unilaterally when they believe it's necessary. They understand that in war, results often matter more than authority. The most controversial aspect of this parallel is that both men may actually be better rulers than the monarchs they serve. Daemon is more decisive and experienced than Rhaenyra. Aemond is more disciplined and strategic than Aegon. This creates a tension where the most capable person in each faction is not the one with the legitimate claim, a recipe for internal conflict that weakens both sides. Prophecy and Destiny, the Prince That Was Promised. The sixth parallel between Daemon and Aemond revolves around their complicated relationship with Targaryen prophecy, specifically the Song of Ice and Fire and the Prince That Was Promised. In Season 1, we learned that Viserys shared the prophecy with Rhaenyra, but not with Daemon. This exclusion deeply wounds Daemon, who believes he should have been trusted with this family secret. When he finally learns of it in Season 2, he dismisses it as nonsense, rejecting the idea that Targaryens have some special destiny beyond conquest and power. Aemond similarly shows no interest in Targaryen prophecy. He's focused on immediate power rather than some distant threat from the north. When Alicent mentions Aegon's dream to him in Season 2, he dismisses it as irrelevant to their current situation. What makes this parallel particularly powerful is that both men, in rejecting prophecy, are rejecting a core element of what makes Targaryens special. They reduce their family legacy to dragons and conquest, stripping away the higher purpose that supposedly justifies Targaryen rule. Yet ironically, both men are unwittingly fulfilling a different kind of prophecy. Their mutual destruction at the battle above the God's Eye becomes one of the most legendary moments in Westerosi history. They are destined to kill each other, to be remembered forever as two sides of the same coin, a prophecy written in their parallel lives rather than in ancient scrolls. The most disturbing aspect of this parallel is that both men, in rejecting a prophecy meant to unite Westeros against a common threat, become agents of division instead. They tear the realm apart in a war that weakens it for generations to come, potentially making it more vulnerable to the very threat the prophecy warned against. Brutal pragmatism, whatever it takes mentality. The seventh parallel between Daemon and Aemond is their shared philosophy of brutal pragmatism, a willingness to do whatever it takes to win, regardless of moral considerations. Daemon demonstrates this repeatedly throughout the series. He executes criminals without trial as commander of the City Watch. He murders his first wife Rhea Royce for political convenience. In Season 2, he arranges the assassination of Jaehaerys, Aegon's 6-year-old son, through the blood and cheese incident, perhaps the most horrific act in the entire Dance of the Dragons. Aemond matches this brutality with his own brand of pragmatism. He kills Lucerys Velaryon, understanding that eliminating Rhaenyra's son weakens her claim. In Season 2, he terrorizes the Riverlands, burning castles and villages to demonstrate the consequences of opposing the Greens. He shows no mercy to his enemies and little concern for collateral damage. What makes this parallel particularly chilling is how both men justify their brutality as necessity. They don't see themselves as cruel for cruelty's sake. They see themselves as realists, willing to do what others won't to secure victory. They share a contempt for those they view as weak or squeamish, including their own allies. Both men also understand the power of fear as a weapon. Daemon builds his reputation as the Prince of the City through public executions. Aemond uses Vhagar to create terror throughout the Riverlands. They grasp intuitively that fear can accomplish what armies sometimes cannot. The most controversial aspect of this parallel is that their brutal pragmatism often works. Daemon's ruthlessness helps him survive and thrive in dangerous situations. Aemond's campaign of terror effectively neutralizes much of the Riverlands. This raises uncomfortable questions about whether such methods, however morally repugnant, are effective in the context of medieval warfare. Destined for mutual destruction, the battle above the God's Eye. The final and most important parallel between Daemon and Aemond is their shared destiny, to die killing each other in what will become the most legendary dragon battle in Westerosi history. According to Fire and Blood, Daemon and Aemond will eventually face off in single combat above the God's Eye Lake. Daemon on Caraxes, Aemond on Vhagar, uncle against nephew, the two most dangerous men of their respective factions meeting in a battle to the death. What makes this parallel so perfect is that neither can exist while the other lives. They are too similar, too dangerous, too unwilling to compromise. Their mutual destruction is the only possible outcome of their parallel lives, a final confirmation that they are two sides of the same coin. The battle itself is described in legendary terms. As the dragons clash in midair, Daemon leaps from Caraxes to Vhagar, plunging his Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister through Aemond's remaining eye. Both dragons, locked together in combat, plummet into the God's Eye. Neither rider survives. This destined confrontation represents the culmination of all their other parallels. two second sons, riders of fearsome dragons, physically transformed by their experiences, sexual deviants, kingmakers without crowns, rejectors of prophecy, brutal pragmatists, meeting in a final act of mutual annihilation. The most disturbing aspect of this parallel is that their deaths solve nothing. The dance continues without them, claiming more lives and ultimately devastating House Targaryen. Their legendary duel becomes just another tragic chapter in a war that leaves no true victors, only survivors. The parallels between Daemon and Aemond Targaryen reveal something profound about House of the Dragon and the Targaryen dynasty itself. These two men, born generations apart, follow such similar paths that it's almost as if they're playing out the same tragic role in different acts of the same play. Their similarities aren't coincidental, they're the result of the toxic Targaryen legacy, a family culture that breeds the same types of monsters generation after generation. Both men are products of a system that values power over compassion, conquest over connection, and fire and blood over peace and prosperity. What makes their parallel journeys truly tragic is that both men could have been so much more. Daemon, with his military experience and charisma, could have been a valuable advisor to Rhaenyra, helping her rule wisely rather than pushing her toward destruction. Aemond, with his intelligence and discipline, could have been a stabilizing force for the Greens rather than an agent of escalation. Instead, their parallel flaws their pride, their ruthlessness, their inability to compromise lead them inexorably toward mutual destruction. And in their downfall, they take much of House Targaryen with them. The Dance of the Dragons, which they both help to ignite and escalate, marks the beginning of the end for Targaryen power in Westeros. As we continue watching House of the Dragon, pay close attention to how these parallels develop. We've already seen many of them established in the first two seasons, and the remaining ones will likely unfold as the series progresses toward its inevitable, tragic conclusion: two dragons and two riders plummeting into the God's Eye, the perfect symbol of how the Targaryens ultimately destroy themselves. If you enjoyed this breakdown of the parallels between Daemon and Aemond, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which parallel you find most fascinating or which character you think is ultimately more dangerous. This is Explainified, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching this deep dive into the dark mirrors of House of the Dragon. If you want to learn more about the Dance of the Dragons, check out my video on how this civil war ultimately ends, which I'll link right here. This is Explainified, and I'll see you in the next one.